This is a Parks Canada production. Ce balado est aussi disponible en français.
Imagine stepping back in time to the year 1022. You're on a cold, windy mountaintop looking out at a vast stretch of wilderness. You sink your roots deeper into the ground and stretch your needles to the sun. That's right, you're a tree. A young whitebark pine tree that is settling in to watch the next 1,000 years. It's hard to imagine living that long and seeing so much change, but there are whitebark pine in the Canadian Rocky Mountains that are over 1,000 years old. These incredible trees are the star of today's episode. Welcome back to Connected, a Parks Canada podcast. Get ready to learn about whitebark pine, superfood seeds, a craft dinner-colored fungus, and so much more.
I guess their ability to thrive and survive in these gnarly rocky areas and just the fact that they start growing on these ridges in this rough terrain is one of my favorite things about them.
That's Allison Fisher, a resource management officer with Parks Canada. She helps restore whitebark pine populations in Banff, Yoho, and Kootenay National Parks.
What first got you interested in studying and working with whitebark pine?
I've built a strong relationship with the land and want to do my part in protecting it, including working with species at risk like whitebark pine, where we get to conduct active restoration with the intention that these species can remain part of our ecosystem.
We definitely want whitebark pine to survive because they are a keystone species. Keystone is an old term that refers to the stone placed at the center of an archway to hold all the other stones together. So keystone species hold ecosystems together. They're connected to lots of different plants and animals in really important ways.
Whitebark pine do play many roles. They provide nutrients through their seeds to animals like birds and squirrels, and then also bears. They also help with soil stability. They regulate snowpack melt. They provide a lot of shade so that snow isn't melting all at once and creating flooding events down valley. And then they also provide habitat for animals and birds.
As Allison mentioned, one way that whitebark pine supports other organisms is by making large, tasty seeds packed full of protein and fat. These are a key food source for the Clark's nutcracker. But this clever bird doesn't just eat the seeds. It also performs an important service for the whitebark pine.
Nutcrackers will harvest these seeds in late August, early September. And what's really cool is they collect a bunch of seeds at once. So they go from cone to cone and from tree to tree in one trip. And they're cracking open the scales and collecting seeds and then storing them in their sublingual pouch, which is this expanding pouch below their beak. Once that pouch is full, they'll fly off and cache the seeds at a different site, usually a few centimeters in the ground. In the future, they'll go and return to their caches to eat the seeds. But the seeds that aren't returned to have the opportunity to germinate. So you'll see sometimes like 10 seedlings growing out of the ground together. And it's just part of the story of, oh, that's how all those seedlings got there. It's from a bird. I would really recommend if you're ever in whitebark pine habitat in late August or early September, and you're hearing those nutcrackers squawk, I would recommend that you go and find a comfy spot to sit down and watch them. It's really cool because you can actually see their pouch grow, and then they'll fly off, cache the seeds, and come back.
I followed Allison's advice and totally agree. Watching a Clark's nutcracker at work makes for great entertainment. Now, if you thought this bird-tree relationship was surprising, imagine how bears might fit into the picture. Here's a story from Charlie McLellan, a Parks Canada fire and vegetation specialist.
I was hiking with my father, actually, south of Kootenay Park, and we saw a grizzly bear. And, we were looking at it through binoculars, and you could see the mother was up in the top of this whitebark pine tree, throwing cones down to cubs. The cubs were like fighting over the cones. And then at one point, even the cubs were up in the tree eating cones. And it was pretty cool to watch that. So it makes me wonder if whitebark pine, even here in the eastern part of BC, is more important to grizzly bears than maybe some of the previous research had indicated.
There really isn't a shortage of interesting connections between whitebark pine and other parts of the ecosystem. But this is also what we're at risk of losing. In 2012, whitebark pine was listed as endangered under the Species at Risk Act. It is the only endangered tree in Western North America.
It's important to know the main threats that have caused a decline in whitebark pine. And first and probably foremost, it's the white pine blister rust, which is an introduced fungal pathogen that came from Asia at the beginning of the 20th century. Another main threat is fire suppression over time. A third one is the mountain pine beetle. And then fourth is climate change.
What is Parks Canada doing to help whitebark pine right now?
So a lot of our management actions reflect those four main threats. One being planting whitebark pine seedlings that have resistance to the blister rust. And that alone is quite an ordeal.
It's at minimum a 2-year process. First, we start by doing a stand survey. So we'll go to an area and we will survey at least 100 trees to get a sense of the stand's health.
Millions of people visit the mountain parks each year. A small act like picking a flower, when multiplied, can have lasting consequences for the ecosystem. To protect these natural and cultural treasures, leave what you find for others to enjoy and stay on designated trails at all times. Your actions matter. When you leave a national park, leave it wild. Learn more at parkscanada.ca/wildlife rules.
Allison and her team are always on the lookout for white pine blister rust. There are several signs that tell them a tree is infected.
An easy one is what we call flagging. So that's when an entire branch on the tree will have red, dead needles on it. Another is top kill. So the top of a whitebark pine tree will be dead where cone production happens. The blister rust scar is another one. In late June, early July, you'll see this orange craft dinner color blister rust. It will be really gross looking. You'll also see where the rodents chew all the sweet rust off a canker. So there'll be a large scar on the tree. If a stand has a high blister rust infection rate, maybe 80 out of 100 trees, then we will look at the 20 healthy trees. If they are good trees to collect cones from, then we'll cage the cones in early July.
The cages are made of wire mesh, and once attached to branches, I think they kind of look like weird tree mittens. But more importantly, the cages protect cones from being eaten by animals. Sometimes staff can attach the cages from the ground, but often it involves tree climbing.
Well, we actually were trained by arborists. When we get to a site, we'll first assess whether a tree is safe to climb. So we'll look for hazards around the tree and look how high we need to get in the tree to access the cones. So we have to go up once at the beginning of the season, and then again we return in late September, early October to collect the cones.
What does a good yield look like from a tree in terms of cones and seeds?
Oh my gosh, some years we were collecting 60 to 100 cones from one tree, and their cones had 40 to 60 seeds in them. So that adds up to a lot of seeds.
How do you actually get the seeds out, and how sticky is that work?
It is so sticky. A big key is letting the cones sit and dry for multiple weeks. You can crack them open with your hands once they've dried.
The extracted seeds are then sent to different places, like seed banks or tree nurseries. At the nurseries, it takes about 2 years for the seeds to grow into seedlings. Some of the seedlings are destined for testing to see how resistant they are to the blister rust fungus, while others return to the national parks to start a new life.
What does it feel like to have those seedlings in hand? What's that moment like?
It feels awesome, and it's pretty cool to hold the seedlings that you collected seeds from 2 years before. You can relax and take a deep breath when the day is done and all the seedlings are in the ground.
Good places to plant seedlings include recent burns. Soil conditions are ideal, and whitebark pine really thrives in open spaces with sunshine. This type of habitat used to be more common in the national parks, but fire suppression changed that.
Historically, at upper elevations in the Rocky Mountains, we'd have a fire regime where we'd have what we call mixed severity. So some areas would burn really hot, but some areas wouldn't burn very hot. And it really creates a patch mosaic that whitebark have evolved to occupy. And that goes back to the Clark's nutcracker. It would fly around and deposit these seeds in the soil so it can go back and dig them up later. In the post-fire environment, it could actually see the mosaic of trees on the ground, and it gave it visual cues of where to deposit these seeds. And in the absence of fire, what happens is that the whitebark pine gets outcompeted by shade-tolerant species, so mostly subalpine fir and Engelmann spruce. And that's what we're seeing a lot of now, where we haven't had fire, that these species are coming in, and climate change is no doubt contributing.
Charlie, are there any particular sites where we've really focused planting efforts after wildfire or prescribed fire?
There's about 7 different burns that we've planted in, both prescribed fires and wildfires, mostly just where we've had more of our fires, so mostly in Kootenay National Park. But also we've done some planting in some older burns, such as in Yoho. There was a burn that happened in the 70s. I think some of those areas still have good opportunities to plant.
Kootenay and Yoho National Parks aren't the only places where whitebark pine seedlings are being planted. In fact, all the work that Allison and Charlie do is actually part of a much larger effort to save whitebark pine.
So we're a big team. It's Waterton Lakes National Park, Banff National Park, Yoho National Park, Kootenay National Park, Jasper National Park, Mount Revelstoke, and Glacier National Park. So we all have whitebark pine habitat in our parks, and we're all doing similar measures to help restore these species. So some of the things we do are plant cones, plant seedlings back into the park. We protect trees with pheromone pouches to deter mountain pine beetle. We do habitat restorations. That includes prescribed fire and mechanically thinning competing tree species in whitebark pine habitats.
Are there real and authentic ways that the public can help this species?
Oh, for sure. Number one, learning more about the species and getting out into those habitats and observing them for yourself is a great way to start. Recorded observations through applications like iNaturalist are really helpful to get public reports of where whitebark pine are. And if you can get photos of any issues with the tree's health, like mountain pine beetle signs or blister rust signs, or even if there's cones. There's also planting opportunities. So Waterton Lakes National Park does a huge volunteer planting operation. And then there might be other opportunities with the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation for citizen science.
Many people working together across agencies and boundaries and groups is often what's required to help species at risk.
The group that's working on whitebark pine species recovery across the Canadian ranges, so that's the private and public sector. We've planted 250,000 5-needle pine seedlings across the Canadian ranges since 2009. Close to 80% is whitebark pine of that number.
Oh, that's incredible.
And there's momentum building with that core group. There's a lot more people interested and involved, and there's more public outreach and education. I am hopeful that these species will be able to last because of all the work that's going into these restoration efforts.
How well do you know your relatives? Our ancestry can be traced back to diverse creatures that swam the oceans 500 million years ago, way older than dinosaurs. This summer, discover the incredible Burgess Shale fossils in a safe, fun, group environment and marvel at how well preserved they are. Parks Canada offers guided hikes to 3 unique fossil sites. Visit parkscanada.ca/Burgess Shale and book your next adventure.